So there I was, standing in my driveway at 7:43 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, wearing nothing but my bathrobe and those ridiculous fuzzy slippers my mom got me for Christmas 3 years ago, the ones with the googly eyes that I swore I'd never wear but, turns out, are actually pretty comfortable, when Karen, the HOA president and self-appointed guardian of suburban moral superiority, marched up to my property line like she was leading a one-woman invasion of Normandy. "Logan," she said, and I swear to you, she pronounced my name like it physically hurt her mouth. "Logan, we need to talk about your doorbell." My doorbell, my perfectly normal, standard issue, came with the house doorbell that played a generic ding-dong sound that literally every other house in America has. This was apparently the crisis that required her immediate attention at the crack of dawn, while I was still trying to remember how coffee worked. "My doorbell," I repeated, because my brain was operating at about 40% capacity, and I needed confirmation that this was actually happening, and not some weird fever dream brought on by expired milk in my cereal. "Yes, your doorbell," she said, clutching her iPad like it contained the nuclear codes. "I've received multiple complaints about the volume. It's disruptive to the neighborhood aesthetic." Neighborhood aesthetic. The woman actually said neighborhood aesthetic about a doorbell. A doorbell that goes ding-dong. I'm pretty sure that's literally the most aesthetically neutral sound in the entire universe, second only to maybe elevator music and the gentle hum of a refrigerator. "Karen," I said, trying really hard to sound diplomatic, even though what I really wanted to do was facepalm so hard I'd need medical attention. "It's just a regular doorbell. It's not like I installed a foghorn or programmed it to play death metal." She adjusted her glasses, those weird rectangular ones that make people look like they're perpetually judging you, which, in Karen's case, was pretty accurate, and tapped something on her iPad. "According to HOA bylaws, Section 12, Subsection 7, Paragraph 4, all exterior auditory emissions must be approved by the board and cannot exceed a decibel level that could be considered intrusive to neighboring properties." I'm standing there, coffeeless, dignityless, wearing slippers with googly eyes, listening to this woman quote HOA bylaws at me like she's reading scripture. This was my life now. This was the price I paid for thinking that buying a house in a nice, quiet neighborhood with great community standards was a good idea. "Past Logan, buddy, we need to have words about your decision-making skills." "It's a doorbell, Karen. People need to know when someone's at the door. That's literally the entire purpose of a doorbell. It's in the name. Doorbell. It bells at the door." She pursed her lips in that way people do when they're trying really hard not to say what they're actually thinking, which in her case was probably something along the lines of, "You're an idiot, and I hate you." Nevertheless, the board has voted. You have 2 weeks to replace it with something more subdued. And then she just walked away, just turned around and marched back to her house, which, for the record, is painted a shade of beige so aggressively boring that I'm pretty sure it violates some kind of Geneva Convention against crimes against color, leaving me standing there in my driveway, having an existential crisis about my doorbell. 2 weeks. She gave me 2 weeks to change my doorbell, because apparently, in Karen's twisted version of reality, the gentle ding-dong that alerted me to Amazon deliveries and the occasional Jehovah's Witness was somehow destroying the very fabric of our suburban paradise. I went inside, made my coffee, which I desperately needed at this point, like medically needed, and sat down to really process what had just happened. My doorbell. Karen hated my doorbell. The HOA president, the woman who once called an emergency meeting because someone's lawn was a 1/4 inch too long, was now targeting my doorbell in what I can only describe as the most petty, ridiculous, absurd campaign of suburban warfare I'd ever witnessed. And that's when it hit me. That beautiful, terrible, absolutely magnificent idea that would either make me a legend or get me kicked out of the neighborhood entirely. Possibly both. If Karen wanted subdued, I was going to give her the exact opposite. I was going to go nuclear. I was going to install something so spectacularly, ridiculously, magnificently loud that every single person in a 3-block radius would know when someone rang my doorbell. I was going to make a statement. I was going to make history. I was going to install a gong. Not just any gong, mind you. Oh no. See, when I commit to a bad idea, I commit hard. I'm talking about a genuine, authentic, 3-foot diameter brass gong. The kind you see in old kung fu movies right before someone gets their butt kicked by a wise old master. The kind that reverberates through your entire soul and makes you question your life choices. The kind that, when struck properly, could probably be heard from space. I spent the next week becoming an expert in gongs. I didn't know there was so much to know about gongs, but apparently it's a whole thing. There are different sizes, different materials, different tones. There are wind gongs and chow gongs and opera gongs, and I'm sitting there at 2 a.m, going down this rabbit hole of gong knowledge like I'm studying for the most important exam of my life. I learned that gongs have been used in Asian cultures for literally thousands of years, that they're considered sacred in some traditions, that there's an entire art form dedicated to gong playing that I never knew existed. I watched YouTube videos of gong concerts. Yes, gong concerts are a real thing, where people just sit there listening to someone hit a giant metal disc for an hour, and apparently it's supposed to be meditative or something. I was getting a full education in percussion instruments at 3 a.m, fueled by spite and coffee, and honestly, it was the most engaged I'd been with anything since I binge-watched that documentary series about people who climb mountains without ropes. I found the perfect one online. A beautiful, massive brass beast that the seller described as having a rich, penetrating tone that carries exceptionally well in outdoor spaces. Penetrating tone. Carries exceptionally well. These were exactly the features I was looking for. The guy selling it was this super enthusiastic dude from Oregon named Dave, who made custom gongs as a hobby. And when I told him what I was planning to do with it, he actually laughed so hard I could hear him wheezing through the phone. "Dude," he said, and I could tell from his voice that this guy understood me on a spiritual level. "Dude, that's amazing. That's the best thing I've heard all year. I'll throw in a premium striker for free. You gotta send me pictures when it's installed." "No, wait, send me videos. I want to see this woman's face when she hears it." We spent another 20 minutes talking about the technical specifications of the gong, the alloy composition, the hammering technique, the ideal striking point for maximum resonance, and by the end of the call, I felt like I'd made a friend who enabled my petty revenge schemes, but a friend nonetheless. The gong arrived on a Friday afternoon, and it took 3 delivery guys to get it out of the truck. This thing was heavy, like absurdly heavy. I'm talking probably 80 pounds of pure brass fury. They looked at me, looked at the gong, looked at my house, and I could see the questions forming in their eyes. But to their credit, they didn't say anything. They just helped me sign for it, carefully wheeled it up to my porch on a dolly, probably went back to the warehouse, and told their coworkers about the weird guy who ordered a giant gong, like it was a perfectly normal thing to do. I stood there on my porch, staring at this massive brass disc, and had a brief moment of doubt. What was I doing? This was insane. This was the kind of thing that people do and then regret for the rest of their lives. This was the kind of decision that ends up as a cautionary tale. But then I remembered Karen's face. That smug, self-satisfied expression as she told me to change my doorbell. The way she'd quoted bylaws at me like she was some kind of suburban dictator. The fact that she'd called an emergency meeting about someone's lawn height. Yeah. No. The Gong was happening. I spent the entire weekend building a custom mounting system. I'm not particularly handy. I'm the kind of guy who has to Google, which way does a screwdriver turn? And once accidentally built a bookshelf upside down and didn't realize until I tried to put books on it. But desperation and spite are powerful motivators. I consulted YouTube videos. Lots of YouTube videos, like an entire semester's worth of DIY tutorials. I made multiple trips to Home Depot, where the employees definitely started recognizing me and definitely started avoiding eye contact. By my fourth visit, they'd just point me toward the hardware aisle without me even having to ask. I measured and remeasured and remeasured again, because the last thing I needed was for this thing to fall and crush someone, because that would be really hard to explain to the insurance company. Yes, hello, State Farm? Yeah, so my 3-foot brass gong fell off my porch and landed on the mail carrier. No, I don't know why I have a 3-foot brass gong. It's a long story involving my HOA president, and the mounting frame was a masterpiece of spite-driven engineering. I positioned it right next to my front door, impossible to miss, suspended from a sturdy metal frame that I anchored into the brick wall of my house with enough bolts to probably withstand a nuclear blast. The frame itself was powder-coated black steel. I actually paid extra for the powder coating because I wanted this thing to look professional, not like some janky garage project. And it had an adjustable suspension system so the gong could swing freely when struck. I spent 6 hours just on the mounting alone, drilling holes, checking levels, making sure everything was perfectly secure. My neighbor, Mr. Patterson, came over at one point to ask what I was doing, saw the gong, and just started nodding slowly like everything suddenly made sense. "Karen complained about your doorbell, didn't she?" he said. "Yep." "This is beautiful, son. Absolutely beautiful. You need any help?" So Mr. Patterson and I spent the next hour together, securing this brass monstrosity to my house, bonding over our shared frustration with HOA regulations, and discussing the philosophical implications of using a traditional Asian instrument as an act of suburban rebellion. Then came the wiring. See, I'm not a complete anarchist. I still needed the gong to function as an actual doorbell, which meant connecting it to the existing doorbell system. This required a custom mechanism, basically a modified doorbell that, when pressed, would activate a mechanical striker that would hit the gong. I'm not going to lie, I had to call my buddy Marcus for help with this part because my knowledge of electrical wiring is approximately zero. Marcus showed up, took one look at what I was trying to do, and just started laughing. He laughed for a solid 5 minutes. He had to sit down on my porch steps because he was laughing so hard. He actually had tears streaming down his face. "You're insane," he said, wiping tears from his eyes. "This is the most beautiful act of revenge I've ever seen. I'm honored to be a part of this. Genuinely honored. Like, I'm going to tell my grandkids about this someday." Marcus is an electrical engineer, which means he actually knows what he's doing. Unlike me, who thought electrical work was just connect the colored wires and hope nothing catches fire. We spent the next 6 hours rigging up the system, testing and retesting until everything worked perfectly. He designed this incredibly clever mechanism using a solenoid actuator, which is basically an electrical magnet that can push things, connected to a striker arm that would swing back and then slam into the gong. The engineering involved was actually pretty impressive. We had to calculate the right amount of force, the optimal striking angle, the proper distance between the striker and the gong surface. Marcus was taking measurements, doing math on his phone, muttering about kinetic energy transfer and resonance frequencies. At one point, he pulled out an actual protractor. A protractor for a doorbell. "If we're doing this," he said, "we're doing it right." We installed a transformer to regulate the voltage, ran new wiring through my wall, which required drilling more holes and made my house look like it had acne for a minute there. And set up a backup battery system in case the power went out because, as Marcus pointed out, you can't let Karen win just because there's a blackout. The test run was glorious. We pressed the button, the striker swung back with this beautiful, dramatic arc. And then, Gong! The sound was incredible. It wasn't just loud. It was rich, deep, resonant. It had layers, harmonics, this beautiful decay that lasted for a solid 10 seconds. Metal hit metal, and the resulting vibration seemed to make the air itself shimmer. Dogs started barking, immediately, like every dog in a 3-block radius suddenly had opinions about this sound. Car alarms went off. I'm pretty sure I saw curtains in neighboring houses twitch as people rushed to their windows to figure out what the hell was happening. A flock of birds that had been sitting in a nearby tree just took off, probably thinking it was the end times. Marcus and I just stood there, grinning like idiots, listening to that beautiful, ridiculous sound fade away into the evening air, replaced by the chorus of confused dogs and distant car alarms. "Dude," Marcus said, "Karen's going to lose her mind." "That's the plan," I said. "No, I mean she's actually going to have a mental breakdown. Like a legitimate psychiatric episode. This is the audio equivalent of a mushroom cloud." Good. We high-fived. It felt earned. The official unveiling happened the next morning. I didn't have to wait long. Karen must have some kind of sixth sense for HOA violations, or maybe she just watches her neighbors' houses like a hawk waiting for a mouse to make a wrong move, because she showed up at my house at exactly 8 a.m., probably expecting to find some minor infraction she could write me up for. She walked up to my front door, saw the gong, and just stopped. Completely froze. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish that just realized it was out of water and was having serious regrets about its life choices. Her face went through approximately 17 different shades of red, starting at slightly flushed and rapidly progressing through sunburn and tomato before settling on something that I can only describe as enraged crimson. Her iPad slipped from her hands and would have crashed to the ground if she hadn't caught it at the last second in this weird fumbling motion that looked like she was playing hot potato with herself. "What?" she said, and her voice was doing this weird trembling thing like she was physically restraining herself from screaming, like every muscle in her throat was working overtime to keep her from just unleashing a primal howl of rage. "What is that?" "That," I said, leaning casually against my doorframe in what I hoped was a cool, nonchalant manner, though I was probably just standing there looking smug, "is my new doorbell. You said I needed to replace the old one. So I did. This one is much more subdued, don't you think? Very zen, very peaceful, very aesthetically pleasing. Really captures that Eastern philosophy vibe. I think it adds character to the neighborhood." "That is a gong," she said, pointing at it like I might not have noticed the 3-foot diameter brass disc hanging next to my door. "Wow, nothing gets past you, Karen. Yeah, it's a gong. Technically, it's a chow gong, if you want to get specific. Hand-hammered brass, authentic craftsmanship, really high quality. The guy I bought it from makes them as a hobby. Super interesting process, actually. Did you know that traditional gong making involves heating the brass to exactly the right temperature and then hammering it for hours in a very specific pattern? It's a dying art form, really. I'm practically a cultural preservationist now." "You cannot have a gong as a doorbell." "Actually," I said, and I pulled out my phone where I'd bookmarked the exact HOA bylaw she'd quoted at me the week before. According to Section 12, subsection 7, paragraph 4, I just need to have an approved auditory emission device for visitor notification purposes. You said the old one was too loud, so I got this one instead. It's much more distinctive. No one's going to miss a delivery now. Plus, it's technically a musical instrument, which means it might also fall under Section 18, subsection 3, which allows for artistic installations that contribute to the cultural enrichment of the community. So really, I'm enriching our community. You should be thanking me. She was sputtering. Actually sputtering. I didn't know people did that outside of cartoons, but Karen was proving me wrong, making these weird, choking sounds like her brain was trying to process what I'd just said, and was experiencing a critical system error. Blue screen of death, but for humans. You can't. This violates at least a dozen different bylaws. Which ones specifically? Because I actually read through the entire HOA handbook, all 73 pages of it, which, by the way, was the single most boring experience of my life. And I once sat through a 3-hour timeshare presentation in Branson, Missouri, because they were offering free lunch and I was broke, so that's saying something. And I couldn't find anything that specifically prohibits decorative metal percussion instruments used for visitor notification purposes. I could see her mentally scrolling through the HOA handbook, frantically searching for something, anything she could use against me. Her iPad was out again, and she was tapping furiously, her face getting progressively redder, her fingers stabbing at the screen like she was trying to murder it. The aesthetic guidelines state that all exterior decorations must be tasteful and in keeping with the character of the neighborhood. I'd argue that a traditional Asian gong is extremely tasteful. It's a cultural artifact, really. Very sophisticated. Very worldly. Shows that I'm cultured and appreciate different traditions. Much more interesting than lawn gnomes, which I noticed the Petersons have like 15 of. When's the emergency meeting about those? It's 3 feet wide. Actually, it's 3 feet in diameter. Width would imply a rectangular shape, but this is circular, so diameter is the correct measurement. But I appreciate your attention to size. That's very detail-oriented of you. I don't care about the technical terminology. Well, precision is important, Karen, especially in HOA governance. You're always telling us how important it is to follow the exact letter of the rules, right? So we should use the correct terminology. At this point, several neighbors had come out of their houses to see what the commotion was about. Mrs. Henderson from 2 houses down was standing on her porch with her coffee, clearly enjoying the show like she'd gotten. Front row seats to the best entertainment of the year. The Johnsons across the street were watching from their window, and I could see them pointing and laughing. The Martinez family next door had their teenage kids filming on their phones, probably about to make this go viral. This was the most entertainment our neighborhood had seen since someone's teenager drove their car into a mailbox last summer, and that had been pretty great. Karen, I said, trying really hard to sound reasonable, even though I was internally cackling like a villain who just revealed his master plan and was watching the hero realize they'd already lost. You told me to change my doorbell. I changed my doorbell. If you have specific concerns about the new installation, I'm happy to discuss them at the next HOA meeting. I'll even put together a PowerPoint presentation about the historical and cultural significance of gongs in various Asian cultures. Did you know they're used in meditation practices? Very calming. Very therapeutic. Maybe you should try it. But right now I'm in full compliance with all stated bylaws. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go to work. She stood there for a moment, trembling with barely contained rage, clutching her iPad like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to sanity, like if she let go, she'd just float away on a cloud of pure fury. Then she just turned and walked away, muttering something under her breath that I'm pretty sure included several words that definitely weren't in the HOA handbook, and would probably violate Section 23 about maintaining respectful discourse in all community interactions. The rest of that day was magical. Every single person who came to my door, and there were several, because apparently news of the Gong had spread faster than gossip at a middle school lunch table, got the full experience. The Amazon delivery guy pressed the button, jumped about 3 feet in the air when the gong went off, stumbled backward down my porch steps, recovered his balance, and then started laughing so hard he had to lean against the porch railing to catch his breath. "Dude," he said, still gasping, "that's the best thing I've seen all week. All month, actually. I'm putting this on TikTok. You're going to be famous." "Please do," I said. The mailman, who usually just drops stuff in the box and leaves, specifically came up to the door to try it. He rang it twice, nodded appreciatively, and gave me a fist bump before heading back to his truck. The Girl Scout selling cookies looked absolutely delighted and rang it 3 times just to hear it again. Her mom, standing behind her, was grinning and gave me a thumbs up. They bought me 4 boxes of Thin Mints, which I'm pretty sure was their way of saying, "Thank you for making our day better." Even the Jehovah's Witnesses seemed impressed, though they probably appreciated it more for its spiritual resonance or something. One of them actually asked where I bought it because apparently his church was looking for something to call people to service, and this seemed perfect. Word spread fast. By the end of the week, people were coming by specifically to ring my doorbell. Like, they'd walk up, press the button, wait for the glorious Gong, laugh their heads off, and then leave. No packages to deliver, no religious pamphlets to distribute. They just wanted to experience the Gong. I'd become a tourist attraction. The house with the giant Gong doorbell, a landmark, a destination. Parents were bringing their kids by to show them. "Look, sweetie, this is the Gong house." Some teenager made a TikTok video about it that apparently went semi-viral. Marcus showed me. It had like 200,000 likes, and the comments were all people saying things like, "This is the energy I want for 2025," and "This guy is living in 3025 while we're all stuck in 2025. Local news even sent someone out to do a story on it. An actual news crew, with a camera and a reporter, and everything. The segment was called Suburban Harmony, One Man's Unique Solution to Neighborhood Disputes, and they made me look like some kind of Zen master instead of the petty revenge artist I actually was. The reporter asked me about my inspiration, and I just said, I really like gongs, which was technically true, but not the whole story. But the best part? The absolutely magnificently perfect part? Every single time. Someone rang that doorbell. I knew Karen could hear it. Her house was close enough that there was no way she could escape the sound. The glorious, reverberating, absolutely magnificent gong that announced to the entire neighborhood that someone was at Logan's door. I started timing her reactions. After about the 3rd day, I could predict with about 90% accuracy when she'd come storming out of her house to glare at me. It became a game. Ring the gong, count to 15, watch Karen appear on her porch looking like she was about to spontaneously combust from pure frustration. My friends thought this was hilarious. Marcus started coming over specifically to ring the doorbell and watch Karen's reaction. We'd sit on my porch with beers, wait for someone to ring it, then look over at Karen's house and count. 15 seconds. Like clockwork. The HOA emergency meeting was called exactly 1 week after the gong installation. Karen sent out an email, which she CC'd to literally everyone in the neighborhood, even people who weren't technically part of the HOA, even people who I'm pretty sure had moved away years ago, declaring that there would be a special session to address an urgent matter of community concern. Urgent matter of community concern. She was treating my doorbell like it was a national security threat. I showed up wearing my best shirt, the one without stains, and brought a notebook, because I was going to take this seriously. Well, as seriously as one can take an emergency HOA meeting about doorbell gong. I also brought printouts of the relevant bylaws, highlighted and annotated, because I'd learned from Karen that nothing wins an argument like paperwork. The meeting was held in the community center, which is this sad little building that smells like old carpet and desperation and slightly damp concrete. About 30 people showed up, which was apparently a record turnout. Usually these meetings got maybe 10 people, and 5 of them were just there for the free cookies. But today, the place was packed. Standing room only. People were actually interested in HOA business for once in their lives. Karen stood at the front, looking like a prosecutor about to present evidence in a capital murder case, wearing what I can only describe as her power suit. A navy blazer with shoulder pads that made her look like a corporate linebacker from a 1980s Wall Street movie. "Thank you all for coming," she began, and I could hear the barely restrained fury in her voice, that trembling undertone that suggested she was one minor inconvenience away from a complete meltdown. "We're here to discuss Mr. Logan's recent addition to his property." She pulled up a PowerPoint presentation. She'd actually made a PowerPoint presentation about my gong. The first slide was a photo of my front door with the gong hanging there, and she'd put a big red circle around it with an arrow pointing to it labeled "Violation," just in case anyone in the room was confused about which giant brass disc we were discussing. The second slide was titled "Community Impact Assessment" in 72-point font. "As you can see," she continued, clicking to the next slide, which showed a sound meter reading, "This instrument produces noise levels that far exceed acceptable community standards. I measured it at 85 decibels from my property. That's equivalent to a lawnmower that goes off every time someone rings a doorbell. 85 decibels is about the same as a kitchen blender," I pointed out, raising my hand like I was in school, being the annoying kid who always has something to say. "Also, technically only slightly louder than a normal doorbell, which typically registers around 70 to 80 decibels. So really, we're talking about a difference of maybe 5 to 15 decibels, which is barely perceptible to the human ear." She glared at me with the intensity of 1,000 suns. "The issue isn't just the volume. It's the disruption, the frequency, the duration of the sound, the sheer absurdity of having a gong as a doorbell." "I don't know, Karen," Mrs. Henderson said from the back row, and I could have kissed her. Literally could have just walked back there and planted one on her. "I think it's kind of charming. Better than those annoying chime ones that play Christmas songs all year round. The Robinsons have one that plays Jingle Bells in July. That's actually disturbing." There were murmurs of agreement. I looked around the room and realized that not everyone was on Karen's side. In fact, some people were smiling. Some people thought this was hilarious. Some people were here specifically because they supported the gong. "It's a safety concern," Karen said, switching tactics, moving to her next slide, which showed a stock photo of an ambulance. She'd actually put clip art in her presentation. "What if emergency services need to locate the house quickly? That gong is distracting. It could cause confusion." "I'd argue it makes my house easier to find," I said. "Big brass gong, pretty distinctive. EMTs would have no trouble figuring out which house to go to. It's like a landmark. Better than those houses that don't have their numbers visible from the street. You want to talk about safety hazards? Let's talk about the Hendersons' house where the numbers fell off 2 years ago, and they still haven't replaced them." "Hey," Mr. Henderson said, but he was smiling. More murmurs. Someone in the back, actually, laughed. Karen's face was doing that color thing again. Karen's presentation continued for another 20 minutes. She'd put together charts showing noise pollution impact zones, graphs comparing doorbell decibel levels across different types, citations of obscure HOA bylaws I'm pretty sure she'd made up on the spot, or at least heavily misinterpreted, and even testimonials from concerned neighbors, though she didn't name them, which made me suspicious they didn't actually exist, and she'd just written them herself. One slide literally said, "Testimonial number 3. The gong disrupts my afternoon meditation." I almost burst out laughing because I'd never seen anyone in this neighborhood meditate. The closest thing we had to meditation was Mr. Patterson falling asleep in his lawn chair on Sundays. Finally, she called for a vote to force me to remove the gong. "All in favor of requiring Mr. Logan to remove his doorbell and replace it with something more appropriate within 30 days, or face fines of $100 per day?" About 8 hands went up. Karen looked triumphant, already reaching for her iPad to record the results. "All opposed?" 22 hands went up. 22. Including, I noticed with great satisfaction, some of the people who usually sided with Karen on everything, like the Baileys, who were usually her biggest supporters. Her face went through that color progression again. Shock white, to confusion pink, to rage red, then to what I can only describe as defeated purple. But this is clearly a violation of community standards. Section 12 clearly states, "Motion denied," said Mr. Peterson, who was technically the HOA vice president, but usually just let Karen run everything because he couldn't be bothered. "The gong stays. Honestly, Karen, I think you need to pick your battles. It's a doorbell. An unusual doorbell, sure, but it's still just a doorbell. Now, can we please adjourn this meeting? I'm missing the game." Playoffs just started. Multiple people stood up immediately, apparently also missing various television programs or just tired of being there. I left that meeting feeling like I'd won an Oscar or an Olympic gold medal or whatever award you get for successful suburban warfare. People were coming up to me, shaking my hand, patting me on the back, telling me they loved the gong. Mrs. Henderson invited me over for dinner that Friday. The Johnsons' teenage son asked if he could ring it again on his way home. A couple of people asked where I bought it, because apparently they wanted their own. Karen avoided eye contact with everyone and left immediately, her iPad clutched to her chest like a shield, her heels clicking frantically on the linoleum floor as she power-walked to the exit. The next few weeks were absolutely blissful. The gong became part of the neighborhood's identity. People started using it as a landmark when giving directions. "Yeah, turn left at the house with the giant gong, then go 2 blocks. The delivery drivers all knew my address by heart now. Some of them had started competing to see who could make it ring the loudest, experimenting with different button-pressing techniques. UPS guy developed this 2-handed double-tap method that made it ring extra long. FedEx guy preferred a rapid triple press that created this weird harmonic effect. They'd sometimes see each other on the street and compare notes about their techniques. But then something unexpected happened. About a month after the installation, I came home from work to find Karen standing on my porch. Not angry Karen, not furious, red-faced, iPad-wielding Karen. Just regular Karen, wearing jeans and a regular shirt instead of her usual power suit. She looked tired. Human, almost. "Logan," she said, and her voice was different, quieter, softer, like a regular person instead of a HOA enforcement robot. "Can we talk?" I was immediately suspicious. This had to be a trap. This was definitely a trap. Karen didn't do quiet or reasonable. This was probably some kind of elaborate scheme. Maybe she'd secretly installed cameras and was recording me so she could claim I was harassing her. Maybe she'd brought legal documents for me to sign. Maybe she'd figured out some obscure bylaw I'd actually violated. But I nodded and opened the door, gesturing for her to come inside, because I'm apparently an idiot who can't resist curiosity. We sat down in my living room, which, for the record, is decorated in what I call bachelor chic, meaning I have furniture from at least 4 different decades, and nothing matches, and there's a poster on the wall from a movie that came out in 2015. And she just looked at me for a moment. "I owe you an apology," she finally said. I'm pretty sure my face did something weird, like all my features rearranged themselves into a configuration that didn't make sense, because she actually smiled a little. A real smile, not the tight-lipped grimace she usually wore. "I've been thinking a lot about this whole thing," she continued, folding her hands in her lap like she'd actually prepared this speech. "About the doorbell, the gong, all of it. And I realized I was being ridiculous. You were right. There's nothing in the bylaws that actually prohibits what you did. I was just annoyed because it wasn't what I wanted, and I'm used to getting what I want when it comes to the HOA. I've been president for 6 years, and people usually just go along with whatever I say. And you didn't, and that made me angry." This was surreal. I was sitting in my living room, listening to Karen admit she was wrong. The universe had clearly glitched. This shouldn't be possible. I was half expecting her to reveal this was an elaborate prank, or that I was on some hidden camera show. "The thing is," she went on, and I could tell this was actually hard for her, watching this whole thing play out, seeing how the neighborhood reacted, it made me realize that maybe I've been taking the HOA stuff too seriously. Maybe I've been taking everything too seriously. My husband, you haven't met him, he works a lot. He's been telling me for years that I needed to loosen up. And I kept telling him he was being ridiculous, that someone had to maintain standards, that without strict oversight the neighborhood would fall apart. But then the Gong vote happened, and I realized that maybe everyone thinks I'm just this uptight nightmare person who ruins everything. And maybe they're right. "I mean," I said carefully, choosing my words like I was defusing a bomb, "I wouldn't say nightmare." She laughed. Actually laughed. A real, genuine laugh. "Logan, you installed a 3-foot gong out of spite because I complained about your doorbell. You clearly thought I was a nightmare. And honestly, I can't blame you. I've been one. A nightmare, I mean." This was getting weird. Good weird, but weird. "So," she said, standing up, smoothing down her jeans, "I'm sorry. For the doorbell thing, for being overbearing, for probably making your life more difficult than it needed to be over the past few years. The gong can stay. It's actually kind of growing on me. My daughter, she's in college, you haven't met her. She came home last weekend and thought it was hilarious. She said it was the most punk rock thing she'd ever seen in a suburban neighborhood. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but she seemed to approve. She even posted about it on her Instagram, and it got a bunch of likes." She headed toward the door, then turned back. "Also, between you and me, that Jingle Bells doorbell at the Robinsons' house? It really is annoying. If you want to start a petition to get rid of that one, I'll sign it." She left, and I just sat there on my couch, completely confused about what had just happened. Did Karen just become a normal person? Was this real life? Had the Gong somehow created a rift in the space-time continuum? The Gong is still there, 6 months later. It's become such a fixture of the neighborhood that I honestly can't imagine my house without it anymore. It's part of my identity now. I'm the Gong guy. Kids love it. Dogs have mostly gotten used to it, though there's one terrier 3 houses down that still loses its mind every single time. The UPS guy has started doing a little dance after he rings it, which is objectively adorable and makes my whole day every time I catch him on my doorbell camera. Karen and I aren't exactly friends, but we're not enemies anymore either. We wave when we see each other. She's actually been way more chill about HOA stuff in general, which has made everyone's lives better. Last month, when the Martins painted their house a shade of yellow that was definitely not on the approved color list, like bright sunshine yellow, impossible to miss, she just shrugged and said, "It's fine. Life's too short to argue about paint colors. At least it's cheerful." The whole neighborhood did a double take at that one. I'm not saying the Gong changed her life or anything dramatic like that, but maybe it did shift something. Or maybe she just needed someone to push back for once. Maybe she needed to realize that community standards and being a decent human being aren't mutually exclusive. Either way, I'd like to think I performed a public service. And you know what? Every single time that gong rings, every single time I hear that magnificent, reverberating gung echo through the neighborhood, I smile. Because it's not just a doorbell anymore. It's a reminder that sometimes the best response to petty suburban tyranny is to go completely, absolutely, magnificently overboard. It's a reminder that spite, when channeled correctly, can be beautiful. And it's a reminder that I, Logan, wearing googly-eyed slippers and armed with nothing but determination and access to the internet, defeated the HOA president with nothing but a giant brass disc and an absurd amount of commitment to a stupid idea. The Gong stays. Forever. And if Karen ever changes her mind, well, she can take it up with the 22 people who voted for it to stay. Good luck with that. Gong.